All right, so let's get into it, shall we? So as I mentioned earlier today, or maybe I haven't mentioned, I apologize. This is one of the products of teaching this class back to back. I've already had this conversation. Today we're going to change gears a little bit. Over the last period of time, almost 8 weeks, we've been studying the art of character animation using a traditional kind of workflow, the good old pencil on paper, right? Well, today that changes a little bit as we start to explore the role and the impact of the computer animation process. We're going to be looking at how to use After Effects and then kind of a much larger suite of tools inside of the After Effects bubble over the next couple of weeks. After Effects sits in a really kind of awesome position inside of our professional animation industry, so it's important that we take a look at it, understand how we can use it through the lens of character animation, and then take advantage of some of its benefits. This is not a replacement for our traditional animation pipeline. Actually, where I think it's going to be a natural extension to it. The ideas and the concepts that we've kind of formulated and structured over the last couple of weeks are going to find themselves quite awesomely in here in After Effects. Okay? Now we're going to grow into our full character animation suite. We're going to start off very simply in After Effects this week by talking about how the application works, how to make simple object level animations, and then over the next couple of weeks we're going to kind of graduate, if you will, into understanding how the character animation pipeline works so that we can create some really good work. Okay? I think you're going to have fun in After Effects. It's a great application. It's as close to an industry standard application as we possibly can get. If you work in the traditional graphic design industry, Photoshop, or maybe even perhaps Illustrator, is going to be the app that almost everyone in that industry knows, right? Well, in After Effects, the common denominator for us is After Effects. Okay? It's used just about everywhere. You wouldn't be able to go into any animation studio and across the world and find someone that doesn't know After Effects. It's that prevalent, it's that popular, it's that important inside of our industry. Okay? After Effects, I think, often gets pigeonholed into just doing one thing, and that one thing could perhaps be motion graphics, but it's not. Character animators flock to After Effects because of its strong animation engine and the ability to, it really kind of is like a gigantic Swiss Army knife, right? It can import anything. It can export basically anything. It's tremendously powerful and incredibly flexible. You'll see some of that here in action in a minute, okay? So we're going to start looking at how to use After Effects over the next couple of weeks. And it's going to give us an opportunity to really explore a neat app called Character Animator that Adobe's been developing over the past year or so. That's a tremendous amount of fun. Once we learn how to work with After Effects, then we can start working with Character Animator because there's a direct link between them. There's a bridge between how those two apps work, and we'll talk about that in the next couple of weeks. Okay? So our tool set is growing a little bit. We have some experience. Now we need to start growing our tool set to give us some really compelling results. Okay? There's going to be two things that we're going to strive to accomplish this week. First and foremost, our homework. And this is it. This is what you're going to be building. Just a simple little animation. Okay? All this is going to be done exclusively inside of After Effects. And then for our lab assignment, and you're going to get some time to work on this today, we're going to once again do the bouncing ball, but this time the bouncing ball is going to be done using the After Effects tool set. And we'll talk about how we're going to get to that end result towards the end of class today. Okay? So 2 missions this week. The butterfly open and the bouncing ball. Okay? At the end of today's conversation, you should have a pretty good, solid understanding of how to get After Effects files in, how to animate inside the application, and then render or export them from the app so that we can publish them to YouTube or turn them in for our homework. Okay? That's our goal, our mission for this week. Now, if you've taken GCOM 390, which is our motion graphics class, you're probably a ninja at this, so help out. Crowdsource your questions. We probably have some folks in here that at least understand the basics of working with After Effects. This stuff is challenging. It's very different, but it's not impossible either. Okay? Go back to week 1 in this class where there was a classroom-wide revolt against using Photoshop to animate, right? Because everyone's like, oh, this is hard, this is uncomfortable, I don't want to do it. And now you're really fluid at it, right? You're ninjas. Same experience is going to happen here momentarily with After Effects. The first time we do something, it's hard. The second time, not as hard. And by the time we get to our 5th and 6th iterations, you're down, okay? Draw some experience from our previous assignments in this class, and you'll know pretty quickly that you can learn this stuff. All right? Alrighty, should we get started? You guys excited? You amped? You ready to rock and roll? Yeah? Come at it with nervous trepidation? All right, let's rock and roll. Let's do it. So After Effects is created by Adobe. You can find that we've installed the latest and greatest version of After Effects on every single computer that's in here, right? So down at the bottom of the screen, the purple AE logo is After Effects. Now, if you're working with an earlier version of After Effects, we're working with CC 2015. If you're working with, 2014 or 13, or shoot, maybe you're even going back to the CS days, right? The Creative Suite days. That's fine. Most of what we do in the character animation pipeline in After Effects is old school. They really haven't fundamentally added to that workflow significantly. We'll talk about some of those changes later on. Point being, if you're running an older version of After Effects, you're still going to be able to do your homework. You're still going to be able to do your lab. I'll make sure that everyone understands that we're, tackling new stuff that's 2015 specific when we get there, okay? All right, let's take a look-see at it. There it is. Let me just start a new project here. Okay, so welcome to After Effects. Welcome to After Effects. After Effects is a pretty powerful application. As I mentioned earlier, it's our gigantic Swiss Army knife. It can be intimidating. It's a professional animation application. And I want you to highlight in your brain the word professional, okay? They don't pull any punches in After Effects, okay? You're going to find that the app doesn't do a really great job of helping you kind of figure out the solution. But it's okay, because we're going to walk through slowly how to get to our final result. Okay. If you're still waiting for After Effects to load, very normal, right? After Effects is a beast of an application. It really is, okay? It takes a while to load. Say again? Especially the 3D stuff. This is an old app. It's actually been around almost since the beginning of the computer animation industry, right? So this goes all the way back to like the early 90s. I've been using After Effects since version 4, and that was like in the mid to late 90s, okay? In all honesty, it really hasn't changed all that much, okay? They've added a whole bunch and they've done a lot of work recently underneath the hood. But it's going to feel clunky in certain areas. Know this, love this, give it a big hug every day. Sometimes working in After Effects is a process of patience, okay? Just give it a hug and say, okay, man, let's do this, right? I love you for what you can do, even though sometimes you make me jump through a couple hoops, okay? The After Effects interface is really broken out into 3 major areas. The first one being this part of our interface. This guy over here, this is our project area, okay? After Effects, so this part of the interface, is a big bin, okay? After Effects allows us to import a whole lot of individual media assets and then use those assets in what's called a composition. More on that in a minute. I want to begin today by talking about this import process. And before we start, let's everyone go out to the internet and find, I don't know, an image of something. Just have something on your desktop that you can play with. I don't care what the picture is. Just make sure it's rated E for everyone, right? Just find a picture that you can use. Doesn't matter the size, doesn't matter the content, just find something, okay? Everyone find something real fast, and then I'll show you how to import that file into the application. All right, so I've been working on something for our department. I'm about to start making some motion graphics for our department. You'll see this probably maybe towards the end of the semester. This is going to be incorporated into the live stream stuff. And so this is our new department logo. Yay, pretty cool, right? It's pretty rad. I made a 3D version of it. I did. It's looking pretty good. So this is the asset that I'm going to use for the rest of our demonstrations today, okay? So I need to get this file into After Effects. Okay? We need to import it into the system. So let me jump back over into After Effects real fast, and let's get it in, right? So it's real easy. We're just going to go to the top of the screen where it says File, and as one might imagine, Import. But notice that there's a whole bunch of options in here. We want the first one, File, Import, File. Okay? The keyboard shortcut for this is Command-I. Let's get this thing in here. Whoops. You can't. There's a couple different ways you can do it, but this is just the easiest way. And if we travel to my desktop, there it is. There's my new GCOM logo, and I'll just simply double-click on it. And look what happens over in the bin. It now shows up as an asset. It's some media, as it's called, inside the After Effects lexicon. Clicking on that asset in the bin, it's going to give you a simple little thumbnail preview of it up above. It's also going to give you some technical specifications on that, including the size and the height and width. Also, so here's the height and width right here. You can answer that. This is the pixel aspect ratio, the color depth, the type of alpha channel that it's using, and if it's progressive or a non-interlaced frame. So we get some good tech information on it. After Effects, in every sense, it really is like a gigantic Swiss Army knife. I have struggled to find some sort of file type, media, movie file that it won't accept. It's a pretty great application. It can accept pretty much anything. You can throw a lot of different stuff at After Effects, or you can import a lot of files in, and After Effects is just going to chew through it. It's one of the reasons why it's so prevalent. Okay? All right. So how are we going to use these files? Well, these files are going to become part of a media bundle that's going to be associated with our project file. And this is where the differences between After Effects and Photoshop really begin. And let me just illustrate this idea here real fast for you. Okay? So if we were creating an animation like in Photoshop, for example, okay? So here's our good old Photoshop document. Let's go out and say that we find like, oh, I don't know, we find like a picture of something. So this is a pic. Maybe we have, some sort of, scaled vector graphic. I don't know, a color swatch or something. Just a whole bunch of different files. Okay, here's another picture. When we import or place them into Photoshop, all that information is saved in the Photoshop document, right? You only have to ever import it once, and then the only thing that you have to save onto your hard drive is your Photoshop document, right? Everything is internally linked inside the Photoshop document. If you have a whole bunch of layers and a lot of different materials, what's going to happen to your Photoshop document? The size of it. Yeah, it's going to get pretty big, right? The more stuff you bring into Photoshop, into your document, the larger and larger it gets, right? For me, in my imagination, my Photoshop document in every sense is kind of very similar to like a, briefcase, okay? After Effects works very, very differently from here, okay? After Effects, while it does something similar, it behaves more like a website. So here's our After Effects project file. After Effects, okay? This time, maybe we'll bring in like a movie file. We can bring in a Photoshop document if we wanted to. Maybe some more pictures like I just did. A whole bunch of movie files. Maybe a sound effect, some music. Okay, we can import all this stuff into the app. But what After Effects does is this. You bring it in, but then After Effects links back out to it. It externally references all of these files, okay? Think of it like a link, like you'd find on a website page. In doing so, it makes the After Effects project file incredibly small. It's only ever going to be, a couple kilobytes. It's never going to internally link and consume, if you will, all that external media, right? It's going to point to it. Now think about this in the larger scale. We're going to be doing some pretty simple stuff. But if you're working at Industrial Light and Magic and using After Effects to do all of your comping, right, to do all your compositing work, you don't want to have your After Effects project file contain all of your film plates, because that file will now be 8 gigabytes in size. It's going to be gigantic. It's going to be unusable, right? At the large scale, being able to externally link the things also gives us an opportunity to change the external source without having to go in and update the actual After Effects project file, right? We do this in computer graphics all the time, right? We render a low-res version of our scene, and then when we're done, we render a high-res version of our scene, and then we swap the files in After Effects or over in Premiere Pro when we're editing things together. It gives us a very flexible and organic workflow. It's great, okay? It also allows us to work pretty easily in a large team environment. Instead of emailing 10 gigabytes of data, I can email you my After Effects file, okay? And then maybe on a hard drive, I've actually done this before, where I've sent someone a hard drive full of data of all of our video files, of all of our raw video. I'll FedEx that to them overnight, and then I'll email them my After Effects project file, right? And then they'll just relink all the data, all the assets to the data on the hard drive, and you're ready to go. All right. Let's zoom out here. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So this bin over here, this project area, is like a library. All the assets that we import into After Effects are going to be globally available to all of our compositions, which we'll talk about here in a second, okay? So what we see in this list is a representation of the assets that we're using, but we may have more that we're not using, okay? So it's just a global library of stuff, if you will, that we can use in our animations and in our effects, okay? All right. So this part is our global bin. Now this part here, okay, this is a viewer. But ultimately this viewer is directly linked to this part of our interface, okay? It's really important, okay? What we see up in here is really a representation of what we're working with down here. In the bottom part, all this jazz, this is going to be our timeline. And in After Effects, the timeline is kind of a hybrid. It's half timeline that you'd see in like Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro, but it's also kind of like the layers palette that we're used to working with over in After Effects. Let me show you what I'm talking about. And Carlos, since you just walked in, we're working with After Effects today. Great. All right. So if you look carefully at the screen here, we really don't have a timeline, you know? We have a representation of it. It's kind of an empty shell, but we haven't created the working unit yet. Does anyone know what the working unit inside of After Effects is? Think back over into your experience with Photoshop. You open up Photoshop for the first time. What's the first thing that you're going to create? Before we even are able to create a layer. A canvas, right? A canvas. In Photoshop, we work with canvases, right? So in Photoshop, the working unit is a canvas. In After Effects, the working unit is a composition. They are almost identical in function. The form is a little different, but in function, they're the same, okay? You'll see this, you'll hear me and see others outside there in our world refer to a composition as a comp. Okay, so you'll see that out there in our vocab list often as well, comp. What they're talking about is a composition. Okay? So let's create a composition. We can't do any animating nor do any work until we have a composition, some sort of canvas, if you will, that allows us to generate an animation. If you look very carefully at the top of the screen, of course, naturally, we have a whole series of pull-down menus. But there's one that says Composition. If we open it up and look at the first choice, it's New Composition. And let's do this. Let's make a new composition. All right, so here we go. We're going to get this popover. Now, do not be intimidated by this. I know that there's a lot of information in here. It is overwhelming. There's a lot of buttons and switches and channels that we're going to have to work with, but welcome to being a professional animator, working inside of a professional authoring application. Let's take a look at it. The first things first, yeah, we're going to want to name our comp, right? The cool thing about working in After Effects is that we have one project file, but we can have as many different compositions as we want, right? It's kind of neat. You see this all the time out there in the real world, right? It's not like Photoshop where you have one animation in one project file. I could have one After Effects project file and 80 different animations in it, okay? So we're going to want to name our comp. Let's be specific. Let's be good stewards of our scene. I'm just going to call this Pat's Silly Animation. There we go. And now, the next thing that we need to do, very similar to what we did in Photoshop, is begin to develop the height and width of our pixel grid, right? After Effects, even though we can still create vector shapes and use some vector tools, at the end of the day, After Effects is a rasterized bitmap animation engine. So everything is going to get bumped down into a bitmap image, and we need to define the size of that bitmap image before we even begin working, okay? And I want that to stick out in your brain. You need to do this before you begin animating, okay? You need to zero in on what your composition size is going to be first, because if you don't, let's pretend you animated it like, you know, a really small image, right? And then you said, oh, I need it to be really big, okay? After Effects isn't going to like scale all your artwork to fit the new container. It's going to keep it at its original size, okay? Making changes to your comp size is going to force you to redo some work. Hopefully not a lot, but it will happen. Okay, so there's some similar settings in here that we've seen over in Photoshop. The height and width, these are in pixels, okay? Now, if you're changing these numbers for your homework, and sometimes this lock aspect ratio gets in the way, like if you're doing like 720 and you're trying to put like 480 in here, you'll see this for your homework this week. You go, oh, I want that to be, Pat said it needed to be 720 by 480, and then you go, wait, now it's 480, but it's 853. Hold on a second, it must have been me. Let me change it. Oop, not that. Then 405, and you're going to drive yourself crazy. You're going to drive yourself crazy, right? Because at the moment, the aspect ratio of our image is constrained. It's linked together. Uncheck this box, boop, and now we can independently add values into these channel boxes and get the desired frame width and height. Let's do it 480. All right, rock and roll. Okay. Let's put this back to 1280 by 720. This is what we've been working with up until now. All right. Pixel aspect ratio, another value that over in Photoshop we wholesale ignored, right? Why is this an important idea, if not the most important thing inside of our composition settings? Let's explore this for a second. Believe it or not all pixels are made equal, okay? I bet you thought up until today all pixels were square, right? What's the actual shape of a pixel? It is a rectangle, okay? It is a rectangle. For the most part, up until maybe about 10 years ago, overwhelmingly all the viewing devices, so like a television right here, okay, had used rectangular pixels, or we had to generate rectangular pixels so the image would show up correctly on a television, okay? This is something that we need to zero in on, right? Televisions, all rectangular pixels. What would be a viewing device that has square pixels? A computer screen, okay? There's really two things that determines the aspect ratio, what the final image looks like. The height and width, absolutely, but also the pixel aspect ratio. There's a reason why most televisions are rectangular, because their pixel aspect ratio is rectangular. Up until literally about 3 years ago, what was the basic shape of a computer monitor? Square, right? They were square, right? That's because the pixels on that viewing device were also square, okay? Now, the pixels on our computers are still square. We've just added more of them, and our technology has got us to a point where we can now start making rectangular LCD screens quite easily, right? So if you're authoring an animation that's going to show up on the web or on a cell phone or on a computer screen, you want to make sure that you're authoring an animation at a square pixel aspect ratio. What would happen if you had an image or an animation created with a square pixel aspect ratio and you put it on a television like this? Yeah, it depends on the television, but it's not going to look the same, right? One of two things are going to happen. They're either going to scale the image, okay, or they're going to stretch the image to make it fit. Both things we don't want to have happen, okay, because we want our animations to show up perfectly on the device that they're intended for, okay? To make a long story short, we just got to know what this thing is going to be seen on before we animate it so that we can set up our composition settings to match that distribution output device. For everything that we're going to be doing in this class, we're going to be doing square because we're going to be making animations for computer screens, okay? So everything is square. Most things in our world these days use a square pixel aspect ratio. If you know that you're going to be making an animation for a television screen, non-square. It's got to be a rectangle. And the lovely folks down at Adobe have given us a whole series of presets here that will help us very quickly figure out our pixel aspect ratio. In our high definition world, most things are going to be 1.5, very rectangular, okay? And then you go into the film world, they actually go 2:1 in some situations, which is kind of fun. All right. Frame rate. I love this, okay? After Effects is a professional application that honors the frame rate that we establish initially, which is very cool and very exciting, okay? Of course, what frame rate are we going to want to use for our animations? 24, right? 24. Now, depending on who was using After Effects before you, this may be different, okay? It may be 2997, okay? But you can just go in, you can manually change this to 24, and again, there's a pull-down menu that gives you all the preset frame rates that come with the app. The guys and gals down at Adobe, oops, I apologize. The guys and gals down at Adobe are pretty smart. They've given us some presets that are developed by our governing body, SEMPTE, to make it easy to make sure that we're compliant. Let's just choose 24, and we're on our way. Now, this next thing, I want you to ignore every bit this resolution thing. Don't touch it, don't change it, you don't need to change it, okay? You always want to keep your resolution on full. What this is ultimately going to do is determine the quality of your render. There are more direct and better ways of influencing the quality of your render than hitting that button right there, okay? Ignore it. Always have it on full, okay? All right. This next thing, we're going to skip start timecode and just run to duration. We don't have an infinite timeline here in After Effects like we see in Photoshop or that we see over in like Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. In After Effects, we have a defined timeline. We tell the computer exactly how many animation seconds or frames that we want to play within, and then we create our animations in there. So it's important that we understand how long our animations are and then create a timeline that matches that duration. Get used to reading timecode. Welcome to the world of professional video and movie making, okay? We don't necessarily think in frames anymore. We think in timecode. Let's decode what timecode is all about. As you can see, oops, I apologize. It's a whole series of zeros. Okay, let's take a look at it. It's the whole bunch of zeros. Each pair of zeros separated by a colon. There's 4 of them to be precise. Okay. Now, how in the world can we read this? What in the world? What do each pair of zeros represent? Boom! You got it. Great job, Sam. Okay. So the first one, whoop, hours, right? Second one, minutes. Third, seconds. And the last but not least, frames. Frames of an animation, okay? For us in the animation world, that last pair of 0 Zeros are pretty important because this is where we can start really getting the nuance in between the frames, okay? You're going to be seeing this time code structure everywhere. Out there in the professional world, this is how we measure time, using this structure, okay? This is called SEMPTY time code. You see it all over the place, and SEMPTY is an acronym. It's probably the best acronym that I know. SEMPTY, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, okay? They're the governing body that comes up with all of our broadcast standards, and they've created this unit of measurement of time to keep all of the participants in the broadcast and film industry working at the same kind of ruler marker system, if you will, okay? We have to have some standards so everyone can work together inside of those standards, okay? So get used to seeing SEMPTY time code. It's all over the place. After a while, your brain will just kind of start to, get used to it. It's kind of like the Matrix, yeah? First you just see the code, then after a while you start seeing the people in the code. I like the Matrix. It's one of my favorite movies, right? So you'll start to see it after a while. There's some familiarity that you'll gain with looking at SEMPTY time code. It really is a fantastic tool for us. I really like SEMPTY time code. It keeps everyone, I apologize for the bad joke, on track and on time with each other. So we'll get used to it. Okay. Let's go back into our composition settings. Okay, so let's look at duration. Look at duration. If I wanted to make a 10-second animation, what do I need to change in here? And what am I going to put inside of there? What's the replacement I'm going to make? Think about it. Each set of 0, the first set of zeros is what? Hours, minutes, seconds, and then frames. So what am I going to change here? The 5 is going to go to what? 10. Okay, yeah. So we're just going to put 10 in here, and we're going to create a 10-second animation. 1, 0, and now I have a 10-second animation. I think for today's purposes, I'm going to make, just for our little example here, we're going to make a 2-second animation. Now for a 2-second animation, what should I write in here? 0, 2. Just don't put 2. You have to have 0, 2. It has to be a double digit. 0, 2. Then we're on our way. Aha. Now start time code, you can just generally kind of ignore this. This isn't something that you're historically going to have to change. From time to time, if you're working with a video editor or a production company, they'll ask you to change your starting time code so that the files that you generate will get integrated into their post-production system. Here's a great example of what I'm talking about. Before I started teaching, I worked at a production company here in town. And we did pretty much any project that came through the door, okay? We did long-form documentaries, short-form, car commercials. I mean, I've done it all, right? And I was their staff editor, so I did all of their 3D work, all their motion graphics and animation, and then I did a tremendous amount of video editing as well, right? Well, one of the last big projects that I worked on before I started teaching was a 6-part mini-series all about the California prison system, okay? And it was called California Prisons Under Pressure, and it was a mega project, right? And it was kind of a Dateline news magazine style journalistic show all about the current state of the California prison system. Now this is like 10 years ago, so things have clearly changed since then. But it was at that time, the California prison system was going through some major reform, and there were some big problems in there, right? So keep in mind, this is a 6-part miniseries, and each episode of the show was like an hour and a half, right? The amount of content, the amount of video content that we needed to fulfill this requirement was immense, okay? I love this, okay? The state of California, taxpayer dollars at work. The state of California, this was 10 years ago, and this probably when they actually did all this filming is probably 15 years ago. The state of California went to every single prison system and shot B-roll, which is, you guys know what B-roll is for video? Yeah. B-roll is kind of that generic video that you see on the news, okay? So let's pretend we're watching the news for a second. You know, in the studio this says, and we're going to go live to a local corner store where a car has crashed into the Quickie Mart, right? And here is, our live on the spot news anchor that's going to tell us all about it, right? And then they cut to the person out in the field, right? Right? I always love the ones in the wintertime when there's a snowstorm. I feel so bad for news anchors during the wintertime because they send those poor guys and gals to the middle of nowhere to report that it is in fact snowing, right? And what do they see? You see someone like in the middle of a snowdrift on the news, right? And it's like, yep, it's snowing out here. And then they usually cut to some pre-recorded video of like the snow falling through the trees, the cars driving through the snow with the headlights on, things that were shot beforehand. That's B-roll, okay? It's the visualization of the story, okay? The state of California went and shot B-roll of all of their prisons, all of them, right? And they gave us access to their entire video library, which was pretty cool. But what turned out is that we had like 300 hours of B-roll that I had to sift through. Right? That's intense, right? So we had this massive library of video, and all the B-roll stuff was kind of generic prison stuff, right? It had like, the iconic, overused, incredibly uncreative, the long prison hallway shot where you see all the bars and you see all like the inmates' hands sticking out through the bar. You see, then they had the shots of the inmates like working at like making like license plates and stuff. I mean, it was that kind of stuff, right? 300 hours worth of it. And then, so we had all that B-roll, and then you add in all of our interviews, the recording of the narrations, the animations, the number of assets, individual files that we were managing was into the thousands. So what I did is that I created an organizational system using timecode, right? And it was pretty brilliant. I thought it was pretty brilliant. I edited all the stuff, me and another guy. And it worked out quite beautifully because of our timecode system. We were able to organize and catalog all of this stuff quickly. Everything that began with the timecode of 01, that was an interview, okay? So I asked all of my camera operators, when you go shoot an interview, change your camera's timecode to begin with 01. That way, when I'm looking at it inside of my system, if it begins with 01, I know it's an interview clip, okay? That's going to make it easy for us to find and organize our stuff. All B-roll began with 02. Okay? All animations and motion graphics that we created began with 03. All the narration that we recorded in our studio began with 04. And then I had a fifth one. I don't remember what the fifth one was, but we went to 5. And it proved invaluable because then I could just sort by time code and I could very quickly find what I needed for that episode. It was brilliant. It worked out quite beautifully. So being able to change your start time code does have a value. Okay. All right. So last but not least, background color. This is exactly what you think it is. It's just going to be the color of the background of our canvas. Okay? Let's zoom out and hit the OK button and see exactly what changes inside of our world. Boom! Check it out. Our viewer has come to life, as has our timeline down here at the bottom. Before we walk too much further away from it, check it out. Go over to your bin real fast and look at what's been created. We have a new asset showing up in our bin. Our composition, okay? Not only have we created a composition, it's now become available to be placed in any other composition. So we can do what's called nesting. We can put comps inside of comps inside of comps, right? It's kind of like this compception thing, right? It can get incredibly powerful pretty quickly, okay? Get used to seeing this icon. That's the icon for a composition, okay? Notice that with our composition, if we double click on it, it'll load it. It's already open. Our viewer here has also come to life. Look at the tab. It says composition. So we're looking at the contents of our composition now, and it's telling us which composition, okay? Downstairs in our timeline, we have a tab that says Pat's Silly Animation, which is our composition, and we're seeing all of the assets that are currently at play inside of that composition, okay? Remember that there's a direct link between the viewer and our timeline. What we see in this part of our interface, what we see up in here, is really a direct representation of what's happening down here, okay? All right. At the moment, our composition timeline is completely empty. It's just white. Pop quiz. Do you think I can go back in and change our composition settings at any time? Yeah, it's not written in stone. Once you create a composition, you can go back in and change those parameters pretty quickly. So if you didn't want to have a white background, okay, you can change that pretty quickly by going back to the top of the screen. And now we have composition settings. And I just change the background to, I don't know, gray. I'll keep it at white just to make it fun. But you can change any of these values at any time. All right. So let's get something in. Let's play with something, right? Because right now we just have a white canvas. I want to put my logo in there and start making some motion graphics and animation for our department, right? Now we're going to make the world's stupidest animation here. I want to have my little logo, and hopefully you're going to be following along. Your little picture is going to go from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. Awesome, right? It's just, we're going to keep it easy for our first time out, okay? So let's do it. Let's get that asset, that media file, into our animation. Now it's really, really easy to do this, okay? As I mentioned earlier, this bin is a global library of assets that we get to place inside of any composition. So let's do it. I'm going to grab my logo, or the picture that you downloaded from the web, and I'm simply going to drag it into my timeline down over here. And I'm going to drag it into the left-hand part of it on this side. Whoop. And there we go. Mission accomplished. So just drag and drop, man. Drag and drop. Get it in there. You can also use a scroll wheel, too. Questions, Zach? Yeah, you got it. That works. I like your Pokeball. That's awesome. Good times. Extra points for Star Destroyers. Yeah, just hit OK. Yep, that's fine. Okay. Now that we have something inside of our composition, let's start looking at how we can animate this and how each one of these layers really works. And I want you to underscore what I just said. Layer. There's a reason I initially started off, or how did you guys start off working in Photoshop? Because you guys are ninjas at making layers, animating the contents of layers, and just kind of generally speaking, you're good at understanding this idea of transparency inside of our layer stack, right? Well, guess what? After Effects is a layered-based animation system. What we're going to be animating are layers. And our stack of layers here inside of our application resembles the exact same transparency stack that we're used to seeing over inside of Photoshop, right? So everything is very, very similar. Okay, what's up?
Oh, nothing. Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're already kind of pre-built. Our oven is preheated to working inside of this animation engine. It's something that we've seen and done a number of times before today. However, it's a little bit different. Okay? And let me show you some of the differences that we're going to need to zero in on. Okay. Let's zoom in and take a look at the contents of our timeline. Each layer is automatically going to get assigned a color and a number. You can't control this. It's automatically going to do it for us. It's a great way for us to organize and to communicate exactly which layer we're talking about. When you're working in a team environment, or if your director walks in and says, okay, I need you to take the contents of layer 2 and change this. Or layer 8 is looking awesome, layer 9, not so good. So you're always going to get a color and a number. The layer number you can't change. If you don't like that lovely shade of purple, you certainly could change it just by clicking on it. Maybe I want it to be sea foam, okay? Really great, by the way, really great way of organizing and color coding elements together just by changing their layer label, okay? All right, we also get a name. Check it out. Think of this kind of like a gigantic spreadsheet, okay? Of course, you get a name. This name references back to the asset that we just imported in. But oftentimes, when you're working with video files that are coming right off the camera, or maybe someone else that's not as disciplined and as awesome as you are, their names can be odd, right? It could just be garbledygook. I like changing our names to make it a little bit more understandable. So if you want to change the name of an asset, hit the return key, the enter key on your keyboard, and give it a good name. I'm just going to say this is GCOM logo. There we go. Now, remember that we imported this layer from our bin. Did we change the name of the asset in our bin? No. It only changes the layer name in this comp. So it's specific to whatever you're doing in here, okay, which is pretty cool. All right. Now, the rest of this stuff we'll talk about in detail as we continue to go along through the semester. Most of these in here, they allow us to enable or disable certain effects, change the quality of the layer. We can make relationships with this parent column to other layers. But I want to spend some time talking about this little bar. This little bar here. The color of your bar, if you're working with a picture, may be different. In every sense, the color of the bar is directly tied to the layer label color. Okay? I changed mine from, I don't know, it was like lavender or something to this green, this seafoam green, which is why the bar color is changed as well. So that's an important UI distinction to be made. Okay? Okay, Zach did something, and he's freaking out over here because he's not seeing what I'm seeing anymore, right? That's okay. Eat a habit that's tough to break. This happens all the time, and we have to thank the Windows crowd for this, and that's the power of the double click. Don't double click on things in After Effects, okay? Try really, 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 really hard not to double click on your layers inside of After Effects. You don't need to. If you double click on a layer inside of After Effects, you're going to open just that layer in its own viewer, okay? I'm going to illustrate this. I'm going to double click on my GCOM logo. Boop, boop. Okay? Look at how my viewers changed. I now have two tabs up at the top. In the middle one, it says layer, and it's showing me exactly which layer I'm currently looking at. See, it says it's layer GCOM. That's okay. We're just viewing the layer individually, but I want to look at my composition. I'm going to go back over here, and life has returned to the way we expect it to be. Okay? So be careful of that double click. It's going to take you double clicking on things 8 or 9 times. Remember to not double click inside of After Effects. Okay? All right. So let's talk about this bar. My animation, the duration of my composition is relatively short. It's only 2 seconds. When we're working with a still image, a picture, After Effects is going to assign the duration of that still image to match the duration of your animation. Okay? The bar here is a representation of the local duration of just that layer. So we have two things that we have to manage, two durations, that we have to manage. The duration of our overall animation, our composition, and then the durations of each individual layer inside of our composition. Okay? Question? Nope? Oh, okay. All right, so check it out. We can change this. What if I only want to see my logo for, I don't know, a couple seconds? Does anyone have any ideas on how I can reduce the duration, to trim the duration of this layer? Did anyone stumble upon it? It's really quite cool. Check this action out. I'm going to zoom in just to make it really easy for you guys to see. Boop, 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 boop. Now watch what happens. I'm going to place my cursor right here at the beginning of the bar. You see how my cursor changes from the direct selection arrow to this left-right guy? Let me move my screen a little bit so you guys can see it. See that? When I hit that left-right arrow, or when it changes to a left-right arrow, I now can trim the duration of that clip. I can do the same thing on the other side. Okay? Now, this asset is only going to be seen here to here. When my playhead is outside of the area of that bar, we're not going to see my logo. Okay? What we're doing in here is doing some very, very rudimentary and simple video editing. After Effects is not a video editing application, so don't try to bend it to do that. Okay? It's an animation engine. Okay? There are better apps out there. Trust me, there are better apps out there to do video editing, speaking Final Cut Pro and Premiere Pro. Okay, those are purpose-built to do video editing. Maybe I want to have this duration, but I want my logo to start at the beginning, but only be this long. Well, I can move it around if I wanted to, just by clicking in the middle and changing the location of that bar. Put it right there. And now, if I grab my playhead, which is this blue guitar pick looking thing, this right here, this is your playhead. If you left click and drag on it, you can preview a different frame inside of your animation. So if I grab my guitar pick and drag it to the right, once it goes past that bar, now I'm just seeing the background color of my shot. Cool, huh? All right, let's make my animation, this layer, go back. Huh? So I was left clicking and dragging on the boundaries of the bar at the ends. Yep, that's all I was doing. That's called trimming. Okay. Pretty cool, huh? Any questions so far? All right, so I need to make some pretty big sweeping changes to the contents of my composition, because as I mentioned, I want to have this thing go from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. And I thought maybe it would be kind of fun if we made this smaller too, right? So I need to go in and start editing the contents of my composition. And this is where After Effects' old school nature kind of comes out. Up until now, this has been kind of fun, but now we're going old school. how it was originally designed. This is a layered-based animation system. Layer-based, okay? Every single layer is going to come pre-built with some transform channels that define how that layer is going to be positioned inside of our composition. Let's run over to our layer here. And can you guys see this little triangle? I know it's small. This little white triangle next to the layer label, that's a little disclosure arrow. You're going to see this all over the professional animation world. Whenever you see a little white triangle like that, it's not a play button, okay? It's a disclosure arrow. It's basically a gigantic advertisement that says, click me, okay? If we click on this disclosure arrow and open up the contents of this layer, you're going to find that every layer, no matter what type of layer we're working with, whether it be a movie file, a Photoshop document, an Illustrator file, or an image, they're all going to have a transform section, okay? This transform section is home to our 5 basic animation channels that all layers are going to have. If we click on the disclosure arrow once more, bloop, there they are. These are the 5 universal transform channels: anchor point, position, scale, rotasity. That's a good word. I just made up a word right there. Rotasity, rotation, and opacity. Okay? Now, some of these are pretty obvious, like position and rotation. What in the world's opacity, though? Yeah, like how transparent an object is, right? If it's see-through or not see-through. All right. In addition, what in the world is anchor point? Let's find out. Okay? Let's find out. I think I want to make my object a little smaller, because if you look at my logo, yeah, it's pretty big. I want to make it smaller. So I'm going to edit the values that are in this channel. Now, I could do this numerically. If you just single left click on these numbers, you can go in and do it manually. Here's how I like to work with it, because I'm a visual person and often I don't know the values that I want. I want to do it visually. I'm going to hover my mouse over these values. Notice that my cursor changes to include a little left-right arrow, right? These are sliders. So if I left-click and drag on them, left-click and drag left or right, I get to interactively change these values like a slider. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to kind of size it up here. Okay, cool. Groovy, right? Okay. Let's talk about this anchor point, because it's really, really, really important. Okay. The anchor point is visualized by that little target right smack dab in the middle of our layer. The anchor point almost always is going to be placed at the center of your composition. At times, though, we're going to want to move this around, okay? You'll see this in a minute when we start working with our bouncing ball, okay? So there's a purpose for explaining this. The anchor point is where all objects move, scale, and rotate from. Let me show you what I'm talking about. We can change this pretty directly. Maybe I want to have, if I was to rotate my object, yeah, there you go. That's pretty cool. However, if I wanted to rotate it like around this dot over here and swing it like on a pivot, I need to change this anchor point. Interactively changing our anchor point is really kind of fun, and it requires us to click on this button right here. It's called the Pan Behind tool. I'm so happy that the guys and gals down at Adobe have put anchor point in parentheses now. For the longest time, it just used to be called the Pan Behind tool, and I never used it for anything other than changing the anchor point. Let's go ahead and fire off the tool. And now, with the anchor point, or excuse me, with the Pan Behind tool active, I can interactively change the location of my anchor point. Okay, I can drag it around anywhere I want in the scene. Just put it right there. Okay, let's return to our direct selection tool and try rotating my layer now. Where is it rotating? It's rotating around the anchor point. In addition, check this action out. It also scales to and from the anchor point. So the location of the anchor point is really kind of important because it moves. Basically, the anchor point is what moves inside of After Effects. And the pixels that are associated with this layer kind of go along for the ride. Okay? I want to go back in time a couple steps and put my anchor point back in the center of my document. For this animation, I think I'm going to keep it there. Okay. Now, position, scale, and rotation, these are pretty self-explanatory. Look at this. This is kind of neat. I want you to remember this for your homework this week. For the scale channel, of course, we can uniformly scale our object up along the X and the Y axes, but we can also unlink these values, and I can independently change the scale percentages along both of those axes. Check it out. So if I wanted to stretch out my logo or do a little squash and stretch, I can do that now along the y-axis. The first one's always going to be the x. Awesome. And then along the y. So we can unlink and link these values. Okay. All right. Should we get to animating? Yeah, let's get to animating. Now there's a couple steps in here that we have to remember when it comes to animating. Okay? And these are ideas that we're going to see over and over and over again. So let's just take a second and talk about what we're going to be doing inside of After Effects. We actually can't forget the animation pipeline and the process that we've been studying over the last couple of weeks. There's been a sequence that we have to go through, right? Or that we have gone through. Much like we have over inside of Photoshop, the first step of animating inside of After Effects is determining the start position. Where's our animation going to begin? Where's my logo going to begin? For me, it's going to be on the screen left side of our canvas, right? That's the starting position of my logo. The second step is to determine the start time. When do I want this animation to begin? For me, I think I'm going to keep it really easy, and I want my animation to begin on frame 1. On the very first second of this animation, I want it to begin. The third step is to create a keyframe. So we're not ever going away from this keyframe system. We create a keyframe. I'll show you how to do that here in a second. It's really easy. The fourth step is to find the ending pose of our animation. Okay. Ending pose, and I'm going to do ending pose and time, because we can do it simultaneously. When do we want our animation to end? and where do we want it to end. And then the fifth step is to create another keyframe. Okay. So those are the 5 basic steps of animating inside of After Effects. Okay. Think of it like creating the beginning of an animation or the beginning of a movement and the end of the movement. Where and when do we want our movement to begin? And where and when do we want our movement to end? Okay? If you can zero in on that, it's going to be pretty good. It's going to be pretty easy. Okay? So let's figure out where we want our animation to begin. Where? Okay? I think I've already done that in all honesty. And the when is already established by the location of our playhead, right? The playhead is always, always, only going to define when our animation begins. Okay? So I've already done the first 2. Yeah, awesome. Mission accomplished, right? Let's do the third one now, which is the process of generating a keyframe. All right. Let's turn my layer back on. Oh, looks like I didn't actually determine where I want my animation to begin. So here's kind of a cool little thing. Of course, you could go into your transform channels and slide this thing around and change the location of your object. Or check this out, you can just grab it here inside the viewer and change its location too. So you don't have to do it numerically downstairs in your timeline. Okay. So this is where I want my animation to begin. This is when, on this frame right here, when I want my animation to begin. Now I need to create a keyframe to save those little 2 chunks of information. Okay? Generating keyframes inside of After Effects is a little different. It's a little strange. We have to go in and generate keyframes on a per channel basis. Now, if I want my animation to go from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, which one of these 5 channels am I going to animate? I heard someone say it, and you're absolutely right. Position, yeah. So we're going to animate the position of our little object here. It's going to go from the left to the right. Now, in order for us to animate any channel inside of After Effects, we have to tell the animation engine to begin animating that channel. It's not going to animate all of them automatically. It's only going to animate the channels that we tell it to. Okay? We tell it to create keyframe information on a channel by clicking on this stopwatch. Bloop. Now, the moment we click on that stopwatch, we're arming that channel for animation. And look carefully, follow that row a little bit. Check it out. I'm going to keep going. What's After Effects created for me? That diamond. Okay? That diamond over there on our timeline is the visual representation of a keyframe. Okay? A diamond. You're going to see this all over the place. Huh? Yeah, now it's blue. Yeah, it used to be gold. The interface colors have always been kind of dark grays, and it used to be kind of a gold highlight color. Now everything's blue. Yeah. So remember that interface element, that blue diamond. It's a keyframe. Now there's a lot. We've been working inside of this keyframe idea, for a long, long time now, right? How would you describe a keyframe to an alien visiting our planet for the first time? What is a keyframe? I like it, a critical pose of our animation. It's one frame that represents a certain body type or a body movement, excuse me. It's a frame that helps communicate and visualize a story through movement, okay? What we're doing is kind of the exact same thing, right? We've established the starting pose of my little GCOM logo, and we've saved it inside of that diamond. For me, these diamonds are kind of like those plastic Easter eggs, right? I love those the ones that you can crack open, right? You know what I'm talking about? Those little cheapy plastic ones, right? Crack it open, and there's like a little cool like Hershey Kiss on the inside. Except for the ones that got the almonds on the inside. But, oh, I hate the Hershey Kisses with the almonds, right? Why would you want to put a nut on the inside of a delicious piece of chocolate? I don't know, right? I'm joking. Yeah, Sam's like, you're agreeing with me, right? We're about to enter into my favorite Hershey Kiss time of year, and that's the holiday season, because then we get the lovely mint ones. Oh, I love those. Those are good. Those are my faves. Anyways, okay, I'm thinking too much about chocolate and not animation. So imagine these little diamonds like those little chocolate or those little plastic Easter eggs, right? Instead of putting a Hershey Kiss on the inside, we break it open. What do we have? We have information, okay? And specifically, we have position information. What the computer has just done for us is taken these two, that little chunk of data, okay? And it's gone, whoop, we're putting you right in there, into that diamond, okay? We've saved computer information. We've saved position information inside of a diamond, okay? That's all we've done. Now, we're going to ask the computer here in a second to take two of these things and then to transition the values between them. It's called interpolation. Make sense? So far, so good? Yep? Okay. So we've successfully completed step 3 of our 5-step animation process, right? We've now created a keyframe for our position channel. What's step number 4? Find the ending pose. And we'll make it easy for us. The next thing that we want to do is to define when our animation is going to end by moving the playhead. Let me zoom out a little bit here. And I'm going to move my playhead just to the end of my animation. Okay? So we move our playhead, and then we define where we want the logo to end up. And I'm just going to left click and drag it from the left side all the way over here to the right side. Okay? Now, the moment I change its location, look what After Effects does for me. Bloop, bloop. It generated a keyframe for me automatically, which is pretty neat. Thank you, After Effects. Okay. Let's see what we got. I want to put my playhead back to the beginning of our timeline and then tap the space bar. I'll take the Academy Award right now. The best animation I've ever crafted. Okay? But there we go. Now we've generated our first computer animation. Isn't this so much better than having to draw every in-between? Yes. Sam was very quick to say that. Yes, absolutely, this is a lot better.
I was actually going to say, and I don't mean to burst anyone's bubble, but drawing is actually the best part of animation, but this is cool too.
This is cool, yeah. Now, up until today, we've been drawing our keyframes, right? Yeah. We've kind of, in every sense, followed our animation practice. Let me stop it real fast, okay? What we've done is that we have, and I'll put my playhead right on that keyframe as well. What we've done here is that we've imagined that this is the first drawing that we drew, right? And then this is the second drawing that we drew, right? Go back last week to when you were building your walk cycles. What did we draw first? All of the key frames, right? And then, once we established those key frames, which determined where the object was going to be or where the character was going to be and how they were posed to tell the story, then we went back and drew all the in-betweens, right? The computer is doing the in-betweening for us, okay? And I love this. This is actually kind of a great moment in computer animation history, right? The guys and gals down at Adobe are pretty smart, and they understand our animation workflow very directly. Of course, they're giving us keyframes similar to how we would draw keyframes. But does anyone know what this in here is called? It's a timeline, but with the animation, what's it doing for us?
Frames.
It's automatically transitioning that image from the left to the right. This is called tweening, right? Tweening, which references back to what? The in-betweens, okay? Yeah, the computer is drawing all the in-betweens for us. We're figuring out the keyframes, and the computer is drawing all the in-betweens for us. Thank you, After Effects. You've just made my life really easy. Well, on one hand, we've solved some problems. On the other hand, we've created all new ones. Yeah. Okay, let's do it again, because my animation is a little bit too simple for me. Let's go ahead and continue. Maybe I wanted to spin like a clock, do some little rotation in there. What do I need to do? Walk me through the process. What's the first step of our animation cycle? Before we even keyframe it, what do we got to do? So we got to figure out when we want the animation to begin. I want to animate the rotation of this, right? When do I want my rotation to begin? Well, I think I want it to begin at the exact same moment in time as the position. Okay? So I'm going to place my playhead right there. But maybe I want my animation to begin here. Okay? Maybe this is when I want to have the rotation of my little logo begin, right? So we think when first. Then what? Right? Go down to the channel that we want to animate. Turn on the stopwatch. So let's arm that channel for animation. Bloop. Okay? Which is automatically going to generate a keyframe at the current location of the playhead, which is why I asked you to zero in on when first, and then what? Okay, there we go. All right, what's next? We figured out when and what the beginning of our animation is going to look like. Now we're going to figure out when and what the end of this animation is going to look like, right? So we're going to move our playhead. Let's move our playhead towards when we want our animation to end, and I'm going to have it end right here. And then I'll rotate it, I don't know, 360 degrees or so. There we go. Let's play the animation and see what we get. Tap the space bar. Now, if you look at the spacing of your keyframes here, this should begin to make sense, right? There's going to be no rotation until we hit this keyframe. Then it's going to rotate in here, then it's going to stop rotating, and there's going to be no rotation on this side. So the animation, the tweening, happens in between the keyframes, okay? Think of them like start and stop points, okay? We start the rotation here, start, end, okay? Make sense? Yeah? Okay. All right. Let's do it one more time. And then we'll jump over and take a small break, okay? Let's do it one more time for the scale. Maybe I want, to get smaller as it goes through. So I'm going to figure out when I want that scaling to take place. And maybe it's right about here. So I'll hit the stopwatch to automatically save that scale value and lock it into a keyframe. And then I'll move the playhead, and I'll change. Let's make it very small. And now, there we go. Get smaller and smaller. Now, what if I wanted to change the timing of this? What if I look at it, or my client comes in, or my animation supervisor and says, Pat, I love what you've done, but I want the beginning of the rotation to happen at the beginning of the clip. Yeah, this is the cool thing about working in this timeline-driven environment, is that nothing's written in stone. We can go back in and tweak the location of the keyframes pretty quickly just by dragging them to a different spot on the timeline, right? So let me zoom in so y'all can see. So let's see. Here's the rotation row. And there's the keyframe that begins the rotation. So if I just left-click and drag this to the beginning, now it's going to immediately start its rotation as it gets smaller. Maybe we'll do the same thing for the other rotation frame, or the other rotation keyframe. Whee! And there we go. Cool, huh? Pretty neatio. All right. So I've just made an Academy Award-winning animation, and I'm ready to see if the YouTubers out there are also a fan of my work, right? Because, you know, YouTube is just such a lovely community of artists, right? They're so open-minded, right? Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about? Oh, man, just go through some of the comments on my YouTube channel. It's entertaining some days, right? It's a mixed bag, let me tell you. I've had, you're the best teacher on the face of the planet, and I've had, you are a steaming pile of garbage, and you should stop doing this. I can't believe someone pays you to teach, right? It's just wonderful, right? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But now I'm ready to export this, because right now my animation only exists inside of After Effects. I need to generate, much like we do with Photoshop, some sort of QuickTime movie that we can share with the rest of the world, okay? Like Photoshop, this process is called rendering. But how we render in After Effects is a little bit different in comparison to how we rendered over inside of Photoshop. So let's check it out. I want to make sure that my composition is selected by just making sure that there's a light blue border around this tab, and it looks like we're good to go. And then go to the top of the screen where it says Composition and choose Add to Render Queue. Once we click on this, the Render Queue tab is going to pop open. There's a couple things in here that we need to change, okay? The render queue is really our rendering engine, and it is wholly responsible for generating the final result, that QuickTime movie, okay? There's two things that we need to zero in on, and output two. The output module is going to determine how this object is rendered, the quality of it, and the output two is going to determine the destination, where it's going to be saved on our computer. Let's look at the output module first. Ignore this drop-down menu. You have to click on the blue word that says lossless. Bloop. Once you click on the blue word that says lossless, you're going to get this little popover. And you're going to go, are you serious? And I'm going to go, yeah. It's a little overwhelming, but there's only really one thing in here that we need to change. Okay? We need to change our format options, which is going to drive the quality of this. The animation codec is a really great codec, but it's really not great for keeping things small. The file size with the animation codec is going to be quite large, but the quality is going to be almost perfect. For what we're doing, we're going to try to keep this file size as small so it's easier to upload to D2L and to save on your thumb drives. So we need to change the format options. You click on it. Unfortunately, we get another window. That's just bad UI design, in my opinion. We can't fix it. And the only thing that we need to change is this animation codec here. We want to change it from animation to H.264. Okay? Much like we did over in Photoshop. I believed over in Photoshop, H.264 was the default. In After Effects, it's not. Okay? And now what is it? Okay? And then okay one more time. And we're almost ready to go. So we've determined how our animation is going to be rendered under the output module. Now we just need to double check and make sure that we understand where this is going to be saved on your computer. Yes, sir? Yeah, now go to Composition, Add to Render Queue. There you go. Okay. All right. So let's just make sure we know where we're saving this file to by clicking on the name of the file that's going to be created. You'll get your standard OS Finder window, and I'm just going to save it on my desktop, and I don't mind one bit that's called Pat's Silly Animation. Okay? Please, please, please know where you're saving your stuff. Okay? After Effects is not going to tell you again. You get one shot to remember where you've saved your stuff, okay? Because once we render it, this little field here is going to be not available. It's going to be unavailable, okay? This kind of quickly gets filed into only you can prevent forest fires, okay? I don't know where you rendered your stuff. I really don't, okay? There's nothing inside of After Effects that's going to tell me where you rendered your stuff. You have to manage this. Welcome to the world of professional animation. They expect that you know basic media management, okay? Let's hit the save button. And of course, the last thing that we need to do here is, of course, hit the gigantic render button. You have not done a single thing until you hit that button. Okay? Let's render it. It'll take but a second to render. We get a lovely happy render sound. Success. And there it is, just chilling on our desktop. We look at it inside the QuickTime player. There we go. Whee! There it goes. And you got to add your own sound effects too. Life is so much better with sound effects. Whee! Pretty cool, huh? All right. So we've created a movie file that we now can upload to YouTube, put on Facebook, because I know I'm going to want to share this with my friends and family. But we haven't actually saved any of our work inside of After Effects, right? So the last thing we do, and probably inversely, this probably should have been the first thing we do, is to save our project file. So File, Save. Oops. I want to save mine to the desktop. Let's take a look at what's been created. There it is. So that's what the After Effects project file looks like. .aep, After Effects project. Okay. Inside of your AEP file includes all of your layers, all of your keyframes. It is your master file for your animation.
Also, keep track of your assets because it's not like Photoshop where Photoshop saves your assets to the file.
That's right.
Access externally.
That's right. So, as you know, we talked about this earlier, that After Effects externally links to all of your assets, right? So if you started working here in the lab, if you started working here and then needed to go finish in the lab, you would need to make sure that you save, of course, your After Effects project file to your thumb drive. We also got to make sure this is in here too, right? Because this media file is part of your After Effects project file. It doesn't bundle it together like Photoshop does, right? Photoshop makes like a briefcase and it shoves everything inside of that briefcase. After Effects doesn't do that. It's like a website. It links to it. And we need to bring all those externally referenced media files with us wherever we go. Questions so far? How about this? Let's just take a little break. Okay? Let's just take a break. Give me just 2 seconds, please.